you, Bethany, and welcome everybody to this presentation. The city of Marshfield is going to celebrate its 150th anniversary next year, and the Northwood County Historical Society started talking about this in 2019. At our annual meeting, the fall of 2019, we said, now what are we going to do, or how are we going to do things related to the anniversary? And it was agreed that we would start bringing this out in the spring of 2020 and trying to get other groups involved and people involved in planning the activities for the 150th anniversary next year. Well, lo and behold, COVID came up and we're now a year behind. And so I hope you don't mind, I'm going to talk about some of the plans and let you know that we are behind and we are going to need help from people. So if you have any interest or talent that you want to share with the community for the 150th anniversary, know that you are welcome to join us and participate in the activities that are being planned. So what we're going to do tonight, if I get my screen to move here. Oh, for some reason my screen, there we go, didn't want to move. What we're going to do tonight is kind of talk about where we are in the process of doing things right now. I mentioned that the Northwood County Historical Society started talking about this 2 years ago. We've since invited other participating organizations, people that we've collaborated with things in the past, to help put this plan together. And so we've got a number of collaborating organizations, and I think it's important that we share their names, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to give you a brief history of the city of Marshfield. Those that know me probably know that I can't start talking without sharing a little bit of the history of town. I also want to share some of the preliminary ideas that we had at the Northwood County Historical Society when we started this discussion, and then show you what's developed since then, because from that little nucleus of a few ideas, we have a pretty broad plan for the full year. And I think it's important people know what some of those events are. And then lastly, I want to talk about how you can get involved in this process. There are things that will be a team effort, maybe a couple people from different groups. Maybe it's things that we need to do as far as crowdsourcing, try to get as many people involved to accomplish certain things. And so as we go through tonight, those are the points that I want to kind of cover as we're talking. Now, as far as the partnering organizations, we have a long history of partnering with each other, bringing the annual Historic Preservation Month activities or working with events in Marshfield related to history. So to start with, we have the Historic Preservation Association, the Marshfield Area Genealogy Group, Main Street Marshfield, the City of Marshfield Historic Preservation Committee, the Chestnut Center for the Arts, the Everett Roehl Marshfield Public Library. And then when it comes to events like the 150th anniversary, the Marshfield Area Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Marshfield Convention and Visitors Bureau come on board and help with things too. And this is the group that we're really working with right now, but there are others. There are volunteers from the Marshfield Clinic, from the Wenzel Plaza. There are other people involved with the planning activities. So the more the merrier. What we need, and this has to do with the fact that we are going to be trying to accomplish a lot in a short period of time for the 150th anniversary. So what we need is additional partners, people like students and faculty from the different schools, whether it is the parochial schools, the public schools, the university, everyone is welcome to get involved. We also are going to need the help from service clubs, Rotary Club, Sunrise Rotary, Noon Rotary, the Lions, the Eagles, the Elks. There are things for everybody to do from lots of different avenues. There's things we can all get involved with. And the important thing, I think, that the thing that I think is important to mention is also mention to the community that everyone can volunteer, even if they're not part of another group. There's things that we're going to need to do before an event occurs, during an event, or after an event. And those are all times when we can use help. Right now, what I'm thinking about first is the things that have to happen before in the immediate future to make some of the things we'll talk about tonight happen. One of them is researching newspapers, collecting oral histories. There is a need for creating a database of businesses in town. We tend to think about, the phone book as a good source for identifying who's in business now. But what we lose track of over time is who was in business 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago at the same addresses, or how people moved around that were in business. Those people that are from town know that Nelson's Shoe, for example, was on the east side of Central Avenue in the 100 block. Then it was on the west side for a while. Then it was down on the 200 block South Central. Eventually it was down by 7th Street, and now it's down on the south end of town a little farther, about the 1000 block. So what would be nice is if we can create this database of addresses and business locations over the years. It will provide us with information that we can use for some of the projects we'll be working on, and it will also serve as a reference for people in the future about where businesses were located and how they moved or grew in the city. So one of the things we will need is some people helping with data entry. As we start collecting information for stories, we're also going to need help with things like typing the stories up or doing transcriptions of oral histories that are collected. There's a lot of people in Marshfield that have a lot of history in their minds. They have been collecting history for a lot of years. It is important to kind of capture some of that information before it's lost. So what we'd like to do is kind of use, the word was history dump, but I don't really care for that one, but where we go out and collect all sorts of information about different events that have occurred in people's lifetimes and capture that as a form of oral history. Once that oral history is captured, the process will include typing that up and then verifying that the information is correct. There's also going to be a process with photo selection and reproduction of photographs. And so we'll talk about that one a little bit more later on in the talk, but it is important to recognize that there are large collections of photographs that have been taken, that are sitting on shelves that need to be correctly identified, reproduced, and then filed and indexed so that people have access to them. Writers and proofreaders, it just makes sense that as you're collecting this information, you're going to need writers. And one of the things we learned when we did the Marshfield History Project in 1997 was that proofreading is very important. So we will be trying to do the same thing. Anything that we publish or archive in a digital format needs to be proofread and make sure that everything is as correct as possible. There'll also be a couple opportunities throughout the year to do some historical portrayals. We do the annual cemetery tours for Historic Preservation Month. It's been suggested that we expand that to provide for cemetery tours later in the year for just the general public. So we'll have a need for some people that are interested in portraying different historical figures in Marshfield. And when it comes to that kind of presentation, it will be one where we're talking about an across the generations. We'll need young people, we'll need older people, we'll need middle-aged people to represent some of the people that we will try to portray in these little vignettes. And then we also are going to need photographers. One of the projects that we've talked about doing is something called Now and Then photographs. We have a large collection of historical photographs at the Northwood County Historical Society. We have another collection that is in negative format that we need to reproduce, but then we'd like to go out and take a picture of what the buildings or what the locations look like today as opposed to the original photograph, and do a side-by-side presentation of photographs now and then. So it might be something from the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century, terms of the 1800s or the 1900s or the 1900s to the 2000s. So we're going to try to take a nice snapshot of what Marshfield looks like now and compare it to pictures or photographs of the past. And lastly, and I think this one is really important, and why it's important is because not everybody in my generation is real tech savvy. And what we'd like to do is, with this particular set of events or set of projects, is make it so that it's of more interest to the younger generation. And that means using cell phones, using the computer, using web pages and things like that to involve them in the process. And so we will need help from tech savvy people to make that happen. Now, I mentioned that I was going to start with a little history, and so I thought it was important to tell you why we're going to talk about this for 2022. And the reason goes back to Marshfield was first established after the Wisconsin Central Railroad, or as the Wisconsin Central Railroad was moving west from Stevens Point and north toward Ashland. And so when we look at the history of Marshfield, the history of Marshfield really ties in with the Wisconsin Central Railroad coming through the heart of the state. And if you look at the map here, and I don't know if you can see my arrow, but you can see this area that's highlighted in yellow. That is the line of the Wisconsin Central Railroad. And what happened was in 1871, they started over by Menasha and extended the line to Stevens Point. And then in March of 1872, they started to extend the line from Stevens Point north toward Ashland, and from Ashland south toward Stevens Point. The game plan and what actually happened was they got to about Unity, or about to Colby, in the fall of 1972, and then the next year they started working again and met up to complete the line sometime in 1873. What happened though, as these towns were, or as the railroad was going through, the railroad had talked to people, and that where they knew they were going to need some type of lodging or supplies for the railroad crews that were coming through. And in the Marshfield area, we had a French Canadian who was a hotel owner in Necedah, Wisconsin, who either was approached by the railroad or approached the railroad about establishing a depot in what was referred to as Section 32. It was 32 miles from Stevens Point. And Mr. Rivers and his family, his wife, Mina, their daughter, Della, his brother, Frank, and one of the workers that he had working for him at the Necedah Hotel, Dolph Lupian, were the first people to come to Marshfield on April 1st, 1872. Now, sometimes you'll see that they arrived in Marshfield, and sometimes you'll see they started building their log railroad depot or the log hotel on April 1st. But April 1st is an important day in Marshfield history because it's traditionally believed to be the arrival of our first landlord, Louis Rivers. Now, when it comes to the Wisconsin Central, one of the things that is important to know is that the process of building, again, it was a process where they built west from Stevens Point and south from Ashland. And what they were doing was they were going to meet somewhere in the middle. And so in June of 1871, as I mentioned, they started over by Menasha. They reached Stevens Point in November of 1871, and then they took a break because of winter. Weren't going to be able to clear the lines for the railroad during the winter. So they waited until spring. In March of 1872, they started construction moving west from Stevens Point. Now, tradition has it that the train arrived in Marshfield in on July 4th, 1872. I was told that it's the tradition, don't buck tradition, but technically the railroad line reached the area around Auburndale on the 25th of July 1872. It was reported that they had the line open until Auburndale. It doesn't look like they really hit Marshfield until the end of August. And so it was reported that the line was open up to Marshfield somewhere around the 27th, 28th of August. But tradition has it on July 4th, and so we will continue to celebrate that particular date. By the end of that summer, the September of 1872, they had reached section 53, which was Colby. And then at that time, they probably worked further north for a little while, but when winter came on, they stopped and then they started building again the spring of the following year. Now, Marshfield, when you look at this map, this is a map that was made of Marshfield less than 10 years ago, or just about 10 years after the railroad came through Marshfield in 1872. And you can see Marshfield was pretty well set at that time, and they had done a good job as far as growing and expanding in this central Wisconsin timberland. You can see here in this picture, and it's not the greatest picture, but this is Central Avenue running through the heart of the city here. You have the Wisconsin Central Railroad coming in from the south and crossing the screen right here. One of the things that's kind of interesting when you look at this picture is when you look at the first depot that was built. The first depot for the Wisconsin Central Railroad was built so it laid across the road. This is Chestnut Street here and here, the railroad line. And then if you look at this depot building, it actually sat, so it sat in the middle of the road or covering part of the road. Now, in 1887, we had the Marshfield fire. It took out basically from this area over here. It eliminated the depot and a lot of the downtown area here. And we all know about the story of the Great Marshfield Fire. But this depot was later moved across the road where we traditionally think of it today. So anyway, lots of things happened in Marshfield in the first 10 years. And there's a nice, rapidly growing community, steady growing. This is a close-up of the picture that I should have put up first. Here's that depot right here. You can see this is Chestnut Street. And one of the things that I think is important to point out is that when this town first developed, you had a central business district established like we tend to think about, but they also had a business district that extended west on South First Street. And that was destroyed in a fire. They called it the Frenchtown Fire, the early 1880s. And then another fire that was important to mention with the history is this building here. In 1883, there was a fire. January of 1883 was the fire of the Rivers Hotel. And the Rivers Hotel was a 3-story hotel that sat on the area we know of as Founders Square today. And it caught on fire, and it caught on fire when it was a bitterly cold January day, and all the water that would have been needed to fight the fire was frozen. I think it was 26 degrees below zero. And so when it came to the fire, they said it was a slow burning fire, but they weren't able to extinguish it because of the lack of water. They just didn't have the water supply. In April of that year, the city was incorporated so that they could start taxing people and pay for municipal fire suppression equipment. So that's just a little bit of history quickly, talking about some of the important things in the early part of Marshfield's history. For us, some of the key dates when we think about our anniversary next year and thinking about things that we needed to look at, what they've done in the past to celebrate or commemorate anniversaries, tie into these dates. So April 1st, 1872, again, arrival of the first white settler. July 4th, the arrival of the Wisconsin Central train in Marshfield. June 27th, and this happened in 1887, the Great Marshfield Fire. The first few milestone anniversaries, the 50th anniversary, the 25th anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the founding of Marshfield, it doesn't look like they celebrated or did any type of commemoration for those activities. In 1937, on the 50th anniversary of the Marshfield Fire, it's the first time they really seemed to celebrate any of the earlier events in the city of Marshfield. And this they referred to as the homecoming event. And it was the entire community was involved in it. And it was for several days, and people came from all over the country that had been connected to Marshfield early, had moved on or moved out of the town, came back for a visit. And so they referred to it as the homecoming event. One of the very cool things about this year, and I know that our library director, Jill, is on. One of the cool things is that they discovered a 16 millimeter movie of the 50th anniversary parade. And so we're hoping to have that available to watch as part of the anniversary celebration in 2022. Then the fire was also celebrated the 100th anniversary and the 125th anniversary. Just a couple years ago, actually, or well, almost 10 years ago now. And then when it comes to celebrating the city's anniversaries, looks like the 1972 anniversary was the first big one. We did the 125th anniversary in 1997, and now we're looking at the 150th anniversary for 2022. And one of the things that I think about is these are all, they can all be once in a lifetime events, because you're only going to celebrate the 150th once, and they just don't repeat. So they're once in a lifetime events. And it's important to mark them and do the best you can with them for sharing history. So when the Northwood County Historical Society started talking, we had just a few ideas of what we wanted to bring about for this anniversary. So we met in November of 2019 for our annual membership. We talked about now and then photography or photographs. We talked about the QR codes of historical Marshfield, which is already out there. It's just that we haven't been doing a lot with them for a while. We also talked about storytelling software that we could use to start this more tech-savvy type sharing of history. We also talked about Hub City Marker. Marshfield celebrates Hub City Days every year, so we talked a little bit about the history of how Marshfield became known as the Hub City, when it became known as Hub City, and maybe it's time that we think about placing another historical marker in the city, kind of recognizing our claim to fame as being the hub of Wisconsin. And then the last one that we talked about was reprinting the first Marshfield history book from 1997. The book has been out of print for probably 10 years. I know that they are charging an arm and a leg for it on eBay and Amazon. And it's information that we should make available to Marshfield. So we are going to look at reprinting that book for next year. So as far as the ideas go, now and then photographs were the first one I mentioned. When it comes to the now and then photographs, we have a large collection of pictures at the Northwood County Historical Society. We're very lucky to have the pictures that we do have. What we'd like to do is try to create now and then images of those pictures that we have, and take pictures of what the buildings look like today if they still exist. Chris Leonard from the Hub City Times has agreed to publish those, along with a little history of the buildings and the people who use those buildings as businesses, or depending on what it was used for, just a little history of the business. So we're going to go ahead and do that as part of the project. This shows us a picture of Central Avenue. This is the 100 block of South Central on the west side. So all the street addresses are the even numbers. And you've got the building here, the first building on the block that we think of, Jimmy's Cafe, and here it is here in 2017. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to try to capture pictures that provide a snapshot in time of what Marshfield's like now for down the road. We also have pictures that were taken in the early 1900s with the business owners in front of their buildings. So what we'd like to do is try to encourage some of the Marshfield business people to pose for their pictures in front of the buildings that they use today. This is an example here. This is the Simon Flum Harness Shop. Simon Flum was one of the longtime business owners on Central Avenue in the 100 block of South Central. And this is what the building looked like 2017. So what we try to do is do now and then pictures so you can see how the buildings have changed over the years. Some of them are real dramatic changes, and some of them you can still see the original structure very clearly. And one thing I should point out that's important is that about 1940, Marshfield changed the street numbering system, where they had changed the size of the lots. And so what we consider 144 South Central Avenue today at one time was numbered 120 South Central. And so one of the purposes of this business directory that we're going to talk about is to help identify the addresses for businesses before the change in 1940 and then after the change in 1940, what the new number was. And it's not always consistent. So sometimes we're going to have to use, besides just directories, we're going to have to use tax records to identify the legal description of the property to prove what the address was at a certain time. But it's a good exercise to see what and how business locations changed. All right, there we go. We also mentioned the QR codes of historic Marshfield. This is a site that if you're not familiar with it, you should go and look at it because it does have some very good information on it. We started this in 1997 and worked on it several years after that. And then we were running out of space on our website. So one of the things connected to this project is the need to find a new source to house these types of records. But what they are is basically a collection of PDFs that have been generated with either stories that were found in the newspapers, linked to pictures that were available from the Historical Society, or family members submitted for the businesses that they had, and then put together in this QR code page. And this is a story on the Upham Mansion, or excuse me, Upham Manufacturing Store, which was on the corner of 2nd and Central, the southwest corner of 2nd and Central. Shows you the building, the old frame building before the fire. It shows you the temporary quarters over here when the building was put up, and they were putting up the brick buildings after the fire. And then it provides links to other stories that have been created related to that business. And so in this, for example, you can see after Mr. Upham sells the store, he sells it to the Rose Brothers. It became the Rose Brothers store. You can click on that Rose Brothers link. It brings up a couple more PDFs so that you can read about the Rose Brothers. When Rose Brothers sells out, it becomes McCain Johnson. You can click on the link for McCain Johnson. It brings up additional stories about the McCain Johnson store. And then recently it was Rico's Black Belt Studio or School. You click on that link and you get a little bit of the story about that. And because in this case, Old Vanderbilt is a railroad engine that Mr. Upham had, there's a story tied into something in the Upham story. So there's a link to the story on Old Vanderbilt. But what we'd like to do is create a page for every business that existed in Marshfield. I shouldn't say every, because I don't think that's possible. As many of the businesses as possible, create a page. And what we'd like to do is invite family members of the businesses, the business owners, to help us create the stories. And then when there is no family that we can identify, have people working on those stories to create something to put on this page. Another idea that was important was what's called storytelling software. And this is where we get to that tech savvy need again. There is software out there today that allows us to include stories and photographs and links to historical items in and around the community. And now I didn't check this just recently, maybe a month ago, but when the last time I looked at the number of entries across the United States, there were 37,760 entries for different sites across the United States. There were 600 new entries since I looked at it before, and about 442 in Wisconsin. Now, if you look for a map, and you can see a map here, but you can also look at a map of the state on the site. You'll see that there are things for Neillsville, Wisconsin. There are things in Wausau. There are things in Stevens Point. There's nothing listed directly in this site for Marshfield. And what's cool about this site is that if people are interested in historic tourism, they will follow it, they'll open it up, and they will be kind of guided to your location. And so what we'd like to do is start identifying some of the things that are historically significant in Marshfield and putting them on this platform so that people can go to them, listen to a 1 or 2 paragraph introduction to the site, and then have links to other information that's out there about them. So for example, if we were doing the Upham Mansion, and we will be doing the Upham Mansion, we'll have a little story about the Upham Mansion. There'll be some there about who William Upham is. And then after that, there will be the opportunity to put links back to our QR page, which has the stories about Mr. Upham's store, his sawmill, the furniture factory, and things like that. So what this does is it kind of serves as a hub that we can use to point people in other directions for other information about the community. If you ever travel out east and interested in the Civil War, it's amazing how many things are on here for the eastern part of the country. The second last idea was something for recognition of the hub of Wisconsin. We all celebrate Hub City Days every year in July. But I don't know how often people stop to think about how old the Hub City Day idea is. And the oldest newspaper clipping I can find about Hub City in Marshfield dates back to 1891. So the city has been claiming to be the hub of Wisconsin for a lot of years. And it was a really popular idea, promotional piece for the city between 1891 and let's say 1920. If you look at these pictures, you see a couple newspaper clippings from 1891, still going strong in 1897. Here's a 4th of July parade from 1897, and you can see up on the building here, that is the heart of Wisconsin, the hub of Wisconsin logo there. And here again is the same building with that same logo on it. And then here's a an envelope with a postmark of 1904 saying Marshfield, the hub of Wisconsin and the land of the big red clover. George Reynolds was a Marshfield businessman, interested in selling properties. He owned a lot of properties east of Marshfield, and this was his return envelope for his mailings from businesses. But the idea here is that let's celebrate the history of being the hub city. And that's a close-up of the logo. This logo is also reprinted on the back of the Marshfield history books when we did the history books in 1997 and 2000. Now, as far as markers go, we do currently have 2 markers in the city of Marshfield. One is for the prisoner of war. and this deals with the American prisoners of war. And then we have one in Founders Square. And I look at this, and every time I look at it, I see this 1871. There was a mistake made in probably 1880 something, when the book was published on the history of northern Wisconsin. 1871 was listed as the date, and we managed to get that included into that sign. The typical, not typical, but the important thing is that's been verified that was incorrect by Amanda Bartman when she was working at the News Herald. She went through extensive work trying to contact people who would have been here in 1872. She actually reached out to Lewis and Frank Lewis Rivers' first wife's family, and they verified the date that it was 1872. And then Mr. Upham also later on in 1908 or 1909 had verified the date as 1872. So. And then for the celebrations in the 125th, we did these two books, the Marshfield story, 1872 to 1997. As I mentioned, that book is out of print, and what we'd like to do is do a limited print of it so people that don't have it can get it. And it's also been talked about as far as making it a digital copy that people could pick up that way too, and just have a digital copy of it. So that was where we were when we started meeting. And in February this year, the Northwood County Historical Society started pulling together our old comrades or collaborators on things. And we've been meeting since February 24th, planning for the anniversary events. And so we've got the Chamber of Commerce, the Visit Marshfield, Everett Roehl, Marshfield Public Library, the Historic Preservation Committee, Historic Preservation Association, Northwood County Historical Society, Chestnut Center for the Arts, and as I mentioned, we have people from Main Street and from the Wenzel Plaza and the Marshfield Clinic and others that are pitching in and helping with this effort also. First thing we did was we talked about a logo. And so when we started talking about the logo for the 125th anniversary, we wanted something that was unique and specific to the 150th anniversary. And what we said we wanted it to represent the railroad history that was important to Marshfield. We wanted to represent the importance of the logging and wood industry, which really kind of set Marshfield up to survive and prosper in the early years, the transition to agriculture, and then the transition to medical. And so this is the logo that was brought up, and you can see that you've got the pine trees in the background, which were important to the establishment of the Upham sawmill, the railroad. And then as the timber disappeared or was used, agriculture became important. And we've got corn and the famous Central Wisconsin Fair round barn representing agriculture, and then the cross in the center representing the medical community. So this has been adopted as the logo for the 150th year, and I expect you'll see lots of it and lots of events for next year. There's also a page where if you want to find more information about what's going on, it's called Celebrating 150 Years of Marshfield. It's a Facebook group. When we established it, the original intention was to allow us to communicate easily with one another on the committee, but it's really opening up to other people. So if you're interested in participating or finding more information about things, just go on to the Facebook and search Celebrating 150 Years of Marshfield. You do have to ask to join. Somebody will give you permission to join right away, and then you'll be able to see whatever information is posted about upcoming events. And then once we had the logo part done, we started brainstorming about what other things might happen in connection to the 150th anniversary. And this is just a partial list. It is not the entire list. I think there's 45 things listed here. There's actually 90 things that were suggested, and we've gone through and kind of highlighted those things. Some of them have been adopted by different groups that they're going to take care of them, and some of them are still looking for someone to adopt them and become like the project manager of that particular event. But what the intention is that we are going to celebrate the 150th anniversary as a year-long event. We're going to start in January and go through December, recognizing or celebrating the city's 150th anniversary. As far as ongoing events, there'll be, I'll show you a couple in a minute, but there'll be things that are run on a weekly basis in the Hub City Times. There will be things that will be held monthly as part of the anniversary celebration. And then major things will be incorporated into Dairy Fest, Hub City Days, and the Maple Fall Fest, trying to include those things that we already do and including in them the history of Marshfield. There are lots of groups that are participating in things or will participate in things or have things going on. And what we encourage them to do is try to include the theme of the anniversary into their events. And then, as I mentioned again, now and then photographs are going to be a very important part of this. So this is only a partial list of some of the things that will be happening. Now, when it comes to those things, I've already mentioned we have kind of a calendar, and the intention is to celebrate things across the year. This also is not an all-inclusive list, but things that have been kind of agreed on, that there be some type of 150th anniversary kickoff in January. That might go along with a spoken history presentation. It might go along with a Mackey annual dinner. We're not sure yet. We just know what we're going to try to do, not necessarily exactly where it's going to fit. But sometime during January, we'll have that kickoff event. They were talking about a restaurant event, something that becomes a feature of the month, maybe. Where we recognize some of the old-time favorite menus, naming specific food items related to the history of Marshfield and things like that. Anyway, so when we look at this, calendar events goes from beginning of the year to the end of the year. You'll see that in May, that's Historic Preservation Month. That will be part of the celebration. It's been suggested that we have a tour of historic homes during that time, possibly a taste of history dinner. This is where I mentioned the reenactors. We'll need people to reenact some of the individuals from Marshfield's past. The cemetery tours are traditionally given in May for the school kids. That will also be available for the public to view. And the Marshfield Police Department memorial in memory of Officer Fred Beal and all fallen officers is given in May also. So that's just 1 month's worth of activities that you can see. We're going to be trying to be out there celebrating the history of the community. Now, when you go down this list, June Dairy Fest is here, the anniversary of the Marshfield fire. And what we're going to try to do for this is as we recreate the fire walk, this is again going to be a chance or an opportunity to do historic portrayals. As we create that, we're also going to be creating a walking tour using the Clio format, so people can either attend the actual presentation or later on, a year, 2, 3 years down the line, be able to watch and see different parts of it via Clio and links that we can put onto Clio. July, you have the traditional things, fireworks for the 4th of July, Hub City Days. Those are all events that will incorporate into the activities of the 150th anniversary. One of the ones that I think is important, and it will be something that goes across the year, is honoring 150 leaders. It's a project we don't have uh, someone taking the lead on yet, and I'll talk about it a little bit later here because I do think it's important to remember. So the first example of one of the things that's going to happen on a regular basis is something called Where Is It? It was also mentioned as maybe Look Up Marshfield. In the 1970s, the former News Herald or the News Herald had a former series that they ran identifying architectural styles in commercial and residential properties. And basically what they did is they shared a picture in the newspaper, asked the question where it is, and then gave a little bit of history about it. So this particular house, it says a place of Victorian picturesque fantasy lies in our midst, and it goes on and describes it. And people were supposed to go out and see if they could identify that particular piece of property before the next week when the answer was given at the last part of the clue. So here it says the answer to last week's teaser is City Hall. The Roman arched window is located on the Maple Street face of the clock tower. So what the News Herald did was it ran a picture, had people looking for it, and then the following week provided the answer to that question. Now, one of the things that's interesting is the very first clue they gave was this one. It says this sleepy looking figure is more than just another pretty face. She's hanging around downtown. It's a triplet, one of three landmarks, gazing from perches above windows on a downtown street. We're hoping that this new series, and then they go on and talk about it, but what they looked for was people to identify where that was. Now, we believe it's probably gone, but we didn't have an answer in the newspaper that we knew or that we can say where this particular architectural clue actually was. So if anybody's out there that knows where this image, this sleepy-eyed figure was housed and what building it was on, we'd love to hear about it. And it's amazing in the 50 years that have happened since they ran this series the first time, how many of the items, how many of the buildings that they featured are gone. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to recreate this. We have a team of 3 people working on it. They've already gone out and started identifying some of the new images that'll run. And Chris Leonard with the Hub City Times is going to be running these as a weekly feature in the Hub City Times so that people can look up Marshfield or identify the clues and where it is in their spare time. I think one of the things that's important is this is not really a competition. This is really something that's supposed to be a fun opportunity to learn something. The team that's putting this together, Historic Preservation Committee, is going to talk a little bit about the architectural style of those commercial buildings and those residential buildings as a teaching opportunity. So you get a little description of what the style or what the image is showing, plus give you a chance to go out and look for it. And then when they're all done, and as they're done probably, we are going to be creating a link on the Clio page so people, when the collection or the series is through, can actually go and tour these sites in Marshfield just using the Clio guided tour feature. Pictures, again, are really important. And one of the things that the Northwood County Historical Society and the Historic Preservation Association has are a collection of negatives from the Marshfield News Herald. Northwood County Historical Society has negatives from the 1940s all the way through the 1990s. It's interesting to see what was captured and placed in the Marshfield News Herald. And so if you look at the 3 pictures here, you can see when the Wisconsin National Guard unit, the Company C, 128th National Guard, was called up for training in October of 1940. This is a picture of the troops
loading on the train headed to Cap Beauregard, Louisiana, before the start of World War II. We also have a picture of the honor roll. This honor roll was created 1943-45 time period, and it was placed in front of the Marshfield City Hall. This picture is showing what it looked like with all the names on it, the original names on it. Supposedly, there was supposed to be room there for 2,200 names of military servicemen and women. And it went down, or was taken down, sometime during my lifetime. I remember it there when I was a kid in high school, and then it kind of just disappeared one day. Fortunately, we have some community members that are working on establishing a new honor roll inside the Second Avenue Community Center. And it's nice to be able to provide recognition for those people, men and women who served Marshfield, some of who never came back. And the gold stars were indicating on these name placards the soldiers that didn't come back from duty with a gold star on them. And then in 1946, they had an event where the veterans came back to Marshfield. And this is one of the things that's important. Right now, we have the negatives of both of these pictures and reproduce the negatives. This one is just an image from the News Herald. You can see the quality of the print from the News Herald, trying to copy something out, is less than that of actually working with the negatives. So we have to go find this negative so that we have a better picture, more of a quality like this. So one of the things people ask, how can you get involved? This is an opportunity for getting involved. We have the images or the negatives all sorted by the date, the year. What we need to do is have someone match the negative with the image that was used in the newspaper story. And then we make a call if it's something we want to have copied or printed or filed, documenting what that negative is again. And so it's an opportunity to work with the negatives, work with the newspapers, and prepare better quality images for use for projects like the 150th anniversary, book projects that come up from time to time, and other things. They will definitely also be used in the QR codes of historical Marshfield. Things like this picture here, important part of Marshfield history, as is the train leaving Marshfield. Those kinds of things are the things that we'd like to incorporate into the history that people can get access to easily online. Another thing about the QR codes is that's an opportunity to use those business directories I was talking about. This is the 126, 132 South Central Avenue. Many of us know it as 2.5 Cups. It was Jimmy's Cafe, it was Chick's Cafe. What we need to do is get those addresses, that database up to date, so we can document all the businesses that were in different buildings in Marshfield. Now, one of the ways we'll do this is the Upham Mansion and the Everett Roehl Marshfield Public Library have a collection of phone books and city directories. Between the two organizations, I'd say there's about 100 different phone books. Only a small portion of them have been entered into a database already. But we're working in small pieces, we can build that database. And if we can get enough help to do it, everyone can take a small piece, then we can combine it and come up with a nice, easy to use listing for the different businesses. And so up here, I have the recent names of businesses. Here are some of the older names of businesses. And when you have a town that's 150 years old, its buildings were used for multiple purposes. And so it gives us a chance to look what those purposes are and then share the story or history of those buildings with the public. And we also have all these pictures. And again, going back to the now and then, this is the Jimmy's Cafe. At one time, The building next to it was Fran's Siding and Windows. It was also Hastings Hardware Store. Here again is the predecessor to Jimmy's Cafe, Chick's Cafe, and some type of ice cream next door. But what we'd like to do is get these all together so we can document the history of the downtown. And it'll extend outside of the downtown too. The now and then pictures, the intent is to do a weekly now and then photograph to share with the public in the newspaper. And then also it would be shared with the QR codes and the Clio website. And then there's always a collection of pictures at the Northwood County Historical Society. If someone is interested in a specific image that might not make it into or be published into the platforms mentioned, you can always check with the Northwood County Historical Society to see what pictures exist for the different buildings in Marshfield. And then the last one I wanted to mention was this one, honoring 150 Marshfield area leaders. When it comes to the history of Marshfield, we can all think about people that were important individuals in the community. And what I'm thinking with this project is that we would have a nomination form and people from the general public would submit names to recognize people during the last 150 years. It could be in any category. It could be an educator, it could be government figures, religious figures, people connected to business, industry, athletics, art, community service, whatever. Who were the leaders? Who were the people that helped shape the community as we went through the past 150 years? At this time, there's no one, you know, kind of that's picked up the ball on this and said, I'm going to be spearhead this project. So we're looking for someone to do that. It's going to be their job to develop criteria, design a nomination process, establish a selection process, and then a way or means to do the formal announcements. But it should be very easy to recognize a large number of people for the things that they did. And I think looking at this collage of pictures here, most everybody will recognize the names here. Carl Dagey, Mary Upham, William Upham, Hammy Roddice, W.D. Purdy, Fred Beal, Betty Adler, Marilyn Hardiker, Theodore Steinmetz, John Eisen, and Mother Frances Streidel. I didn't mention Chief John Young because he doesn't get mentioned a lot. And I think something like this is an important name to recognize because when the first white settlers settled in Marshfield in 1872, there were other people here. And we don't recognize the fact that we came into an area that there were other inhabitants. We tend not to tell those stories. And Chief John Young was the head of the Potawatomi. He had camps in Marshfield by Columbia Park or up on Arnold Street, later on by the brewery. At one time, there were camps on the corner of 4th and Vine Street. And eventually they moved north. They always seemed to move further north when the white people came in. They lived in an area called the Indian Farm out in Roselleville. And this is Chief John Young. And he is a unique individual, added a lot to the early history of Marshfield. And they talk on the newspapers about 100 or 200 Native Americans being in town on a particular day. So it was a common feature, and yet we tend to forget them. And it's important to recognize all the people that contributed to the history of Marshfield. And so this would be just a challenge for people to come up with a criteria and run with it with the selection process and a way of announcing them and recognizing important individuals in Marshfield's past. And then one of the questions that, and I started saying when I first started talking about this, we're not going to publish another history book. However, that said, one of the things that people can do is if they want to submit a story in a similar way to what we put in the first Marshfield history book, we can use this project as a collection point. So we will prepare kind of instructions for how to submit a story, how to submit a story that could be published, how to submit digital images and things like that. To start with, though, the intent is to publish things on the website, the QR codes of Historical Marshfield, or whatever its successor is. And it may be that down the road, those stories can be used to publish another book. When we first started talking about this in 2019, there might have been time to think about publishing a book for the 150th anniversary. With COVID, there no longer is time to collect these stories and put them into a format to do a good job publishing a book. So anything that is submitted for publishing, quote unquote publishing, will be in an online format, and maybe down the road it could be published as another collection of books. And it might be that, you know, the nomination forms for the 150 leaders and the stories that are submitted about businesses or families could easily fill a volume 3, if you want to call it that, for the Marshfield history books. And with that said, I think it's important to remember that, like I said in the beginning, celebrating the 150th anniversary for the city is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It also is an opportunity for people from all over town and the area and the surrounding area to work together in the background or work together up front to create the events for 2022. I guess what you get involved in is up to you. If you prefer to work in the background, you can. If you prefer to work on the day events are held, you can do that too. As details are made available, we'll be sharing them on the Celebrating 150 Years of Marshfield Facebook page. You can also expect to find things as posted as far as updates on the Northwood County Historical Society page. I'd encourage people to read the Hub City Times weekly. Chris will be publishing things starting in July related to the history of Marshfield and the other areas around here, and keeping you informed about things that are happening. WDLB has agreed to continue doing an insight program devoted to the history of Marshfield on the 4th Thursday of every month. And you can always call the Northwood County Historical Society with questions, or reach out to me at the number listed there too. One of the things that's important is that this is a collaborative effort. I haven't covered everything. One of the cooler things that I think is going to happen is a pop-up book that the library is working on for the history of Marshfield. So there's still surprises out there that you'll get to hear about. But in the meantime, just stay tuned. And if you're willing to help us in any way, feel free to reach out to me at the number listed below. And with that, I think I will stop and answer any questions that there might be.
So at this time, I haven't seen any questions pop up. I am going to wait a moment. We had a few people that have already needed to leave, and they had checked in to make sure we were going to have this published somewhere. So I don't know if we're really going to have any questions. We'll give it a minute here. That was a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff in the works. Very excited to see all the different things that end up happening.
Well, I think Marshfield has a lot to be proud of, and so we have lots of opportunity to celebrate our history.
I'd have to agree with that. I'm just going to wait one moment, just in case somebody's typing something in there. I think we're pretty much set for the evening, though. I'm going to make sure that this video is available in a couple of different places, and I'm going to include the link to the Facebook group as well to try to make sure that people are able to easily find that. So if you are watching this video at the end and you got to the end and you didn't notice the links anywhere, check the description. The link should be available for you to be able to find that and check out what is currently going on. And I don't see any questions, so I think that is about it. Anything else to close with, Don, or are you set?
I think I'm set. If there's anything to close with, it is that we do need help to get all this done. And I would encourage anyone who has an interest in participating to reach out to us.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank
And
you.
everyone, have a great evening. Thank you.